Few names carried more weight in the Arizona Territory during the blood-soaked years of 1875 than Marcus Chessmaster Hawthorne. Not for the notches on his gun, though those were plenty, but for orchestrating what historians would later call the Red Canyon Massacre, a carefully planned operation that left 27 of the West's most notorious outlaws dead in a box canyon near the Mexican border. But that was before he vanished, before rumors of his death spread through desert towns like wildfire, and before he chose the quiet life of a shopkeeper in the bustling mining town of Silver Falls, Montana. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The story of the man they called the Chessmaster isn't just about bullets and badges. It's about a mind that could turn a simple box canyon into a killing field, a strategist who could predict the movements of desperate men like pieces on a board, and a lawman who proved that the deadliest weapon on the frontier wasn't a gun, it was the patience to know exactly when to use one. Silver Falls, Montana Territory, spring 1882. Unlike the rough-and-tumble boom towns that dotted the Montana Territory, Silver Falls had grown into something resembling civilization. The silver mines that gave the town its name had attracted not just prospectors and claim jumpers, but families, merchants, and men of means looking to build something lasting in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. The town itself was a testament to frontier ambition, its wooden buildings gradually being replaced by sturdy brick and stone structures that spoke of permanence and prosperity. The wide main street, recently lined with wooden sidewalks, hosted a respectable array of establishments: Jameson's General Store, the Silver Falls Gazette Office, the Miners' Exchange Bank, and the Crown Hotel, whose newly installed plate glass windows reflected the morning sun like liquid silver. On this particular spring morning, as dawn painted the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold, Marcus Hawthorne went about his usual routine in the bookshop he'd opened 2 years prior. The store, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and carefully curated collection, had become something of an oddity in a mining town, a temple of learning amid the saloons and assay offices. Those who frequented Hawthorne's Books and Sundries knew its proprietor as a quiet man of refined tastes, more likely to recommend a volume of Shakespeare than engage in frontier gossip. Few would have connected the scholarly shopkeeper with the legendary Lawman, who had orchestrated the deadliest single engagement in frontier law enforcement history. Sarah Chen, whose family ran the White Lotus Laundry across the street, was one of the first to notice something different about Hawthorne that morning. She'd grown accustomed to his methodical habits, the way he would arrange his new arrivals in the window display with mathematical precision, how he would check each corner of his shop before opening, the careful way he positioned his desk to view both the entrance and the back door simultaneously. "There's something about the way he moves," she later told her father. "Like every step is planned 3 moves ahead, just like in the games of Xiangqi you taught me." The morning crowd at Caroline Walsh's Silver Crown Cafe provided their own observations about the mysterious bookkeeper. "Man's got military bearing," declared James McPherson, a veteran of both Gettysburg and the Indian Wars, who now served as the town's blacksmith. "Way he carries himself, the way he's always aware of the room, that ain't learned from shelving books." Caroline herself had noticed other peculiarities about her regular customer. Hawthorne always sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. He would order coffee but barely touch it, his attention seemingly focused on a book while his eyes tracked every movement in the cafe. The gun he wore, unusual for a bookkeeper, rode low on his hip in a well-worn holster that spoke of years of use. "It's his hands that give him away," she confided to McPherson one morning. "Too many calluses for a man who just handles books. And have you noticed? When someone drops a plate or makes a sudden noise, those hands always drift toward that gun. Before he catches himself, The town's sheriff, William Iron Bill Sullivan, had his own suspicions about the bookkeeper. 20 years wearing a badge had taught him to read men like wanted posters, and something about Hawthorne's careful movements and watchful eyes spoke of a man who had seen his share of violence. The way he would constantly scan his surroundings, the precise manner in which he would time his walks through town to avoid predictable patterns. These weren't the habits of a simple shopkeeper. The truth about Marcus Hawthorne's identity might have remained hidden if not for the arrival of the Blackwood gang, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had spread terror across 3 territories. Led by the notorious Clayton Blackwood and his 4 equally dangerous brothers, they had turned bank robbery into a science, approaching each heist with the kind of tactical precision usually reserved for military operations. What the Blackwoods couldn't have known was that their carefully planned raid on the miners, Exchange Bank, would bring them face to face with the very man who had engineered the Red Canyon massacre, the lawman who had turned a simple box canyon into a killing field through nothing more than patience, planning, and a perfect understanding of how desperate men behave when trapped. The first hint of trouble came on a crisp morning in early May, when a stranger walked into Hawthorne's shop. He was a well-dressed man who introduced himself as Edward Pierce, a mining investor from Denver. But Hawthorne noticed the telltale signs: the way the man's coat hung heavy on the right side, the slight callus on his trigger finger, the practiced way he positioned himself to keep the door in view. "Looking for anything in particular?" Hawthorne asked, his voice carrying the quiet assurance of a man who had spent years measuring his words as carefully as he measured powder charges. "Heard you might have a copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War," Pierce replied, running his fingers along the spines of leather-bound books. "Got a particular interest in strategy?" Hawthorne retrieved the requested volume from a locked cabinet behind his desk, noting how the stranger's eyes darted to every corner of the shop, marking exits and potential cover. "Military history enthusiast?" he inquired mildly. "You might say that," Pierce smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Though these days I'm more interested in practical applications." As Pierce left with his purchase, Hawthorne made a note in his ledger, not of the sale, but of the man's height, build, and the distinctive way he favored his left leg, details that would prove crucial in the days to come. For Marcus, chessmaster, Hawthorne had recognized something in Pierce that others might have missed: the look of a man conducting reconnaissance. The pieces were being set on the board, though few in Silver Falls realized it. The quiet bookkeeper with the watchful eyes had already begun his own preparations, drawing upon skills that had lain dormant but never forgotten. The legendary lawman who had turned a box canyon into a tomb for 27 outlaws was about to demonstrate once again why some men are remembered not for the speed of their draw, but for their ability to see 3 moves ahead in the deadliest game of all. The transformation of Silver Falls from a rough mining camp into a jewel of the Montana Territory had happened so gradually that most residents barely noticed the change. The muddy tracks that had once mired wagons hub-deep were now proper streets, lined with gas lamps that cast warm pools of light in the evening hours. The tent city that had sprouted around the first silver strike had given way to permanent structures, each brick and stone foundation a testament to the town's growing prosperity. The Miners' Exchange Bank stood as the crown jewel of this transformation. Its imposing facade of locally quarried granite and imported stained glass windows spoke of stability and wealth, a fortress of finance that had helped transform Silver Falls from a simple mining camp into a commercial hub. The bank's president, Theodore Whitaker, took particular pride in the massive steel vault shipped piece by piece from Chicago, its intricate locking mechanism a marvel of modern engineering. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that set Silver Falls apart. The town had developed an unusual sophistication for a frontier settlement. The presence of Hawthorne's bookshop was just one symbol of this evolution. The newly established Silver Falls Academy, where the children of miners and merchants alike learned. Their letters alongside Shakespeare and geometry spoke to the community's aspirations. The weekly literary society meetings at the Crown Hotel's parlor had become social events of note, drawing everyone from reformed prospectors to the wives of mine owners. Yet beneath this veneer of civilization, observant residents noticed subtle changes in the rhythm of their town. Benjamin Drake, who ran the telegraph office with methodical efficiency, was the first to note an increase in coded messages passing through his wire. "More traffic in the past week than we usually see in a month," he confided to Sheriff Sullivan. "And these aren't your typical business ciphers." The sheriff had noticed other changes too. New faces appeared in town daily, which wasn't unusual for a prosperous mining settlement. But these newcomers were different. They moved with too much purpose, watched too carefully, asked questions that seemed casual but probed at the town's weaknesses. A pair of well-dressed men spent an entire afternoon in the bank, supposedly discussing investment opportunities while their eyes mapped every corner of the building. Even the town's children sensed the change. Young Tommy Walsh, whose mother ran the Silver Crown Cafe, noticed how Mr. Hawthorne had begun positioning his books differently in the shop window. "Used to arrange them by size and color," Tommy told his friend Michael Chen. "Now they're all mixed up, but he spends even more time getting them just right." What Tommy hadn't realized was that those carefully arranged books now served as mirrors, reflecting movements on the street outside. Each leather-bound volume was positioned to give Hawthorne a complete view of the approaches to his shop, without ever having to look up from his ledger. The changes in Hawthorne himself were subtle but significant. His daily routines, once a model of predictability, began to show careful variations. He would visit Caroline Walsh's cafe at different times each day, though always choosing seats that offered clear views of both the bank and the street. His usual evening walks now followed irregular patterns, each route carefully chosen to observe different parts of town. Rebecca Martinez, whose father owned the Silver Falls Gazette, noticed how Hawthorne had begun spending more time with certain townspeople. He engaged Sheriff Sullivan in long conversations about the town's layout, discussing recent improvements to the streets and alleyways, with an interest that seemed excessive for a mere shopkeeper. His questions about the new gas lighting system showed particular attention to the placement of shadows and blind spots. The sheriff, for his part, found himself increasingly intrigued by Hawthorne's insights. During one such conversation about the town's defensive vulnerabilities, Sullivan was struck by the bookkeeper's unusual perspective. "Interesting thing about Silver Falls," Hawthorne had remarked, gesturing toward the bank. "Way the streets are laid out reminds me of a story I once read about ancient Roman military camps. Every approach visible, every retreat covered, almost like it was designed for defense." Sullivan, who had served in the Union Army's engineering corps, recognized the tactical assessment hidden beneath the casual observation. "Seems you've given this some thought for a man who deals in books." Hawthorne's response was characteristically measured. "Books teach us that history repeats itself, Sheriff. The patterns are always there if you know how to read them." The town's physical layout had indeed evolved in ways that would prove significant. The gradual replacement of wooden buildings with brick and stone had created natural choke points along Main Street. The new gas lamps, while providing welcome illumination, also created deep shadows that could either conceal or expose, depending on one's position and knowledge of their patterns. Even the location of Hawthorne's shop, situated in a converted stable directly opposite the bank, seemed less random when viewed through the lens of strategy. The building's thick walls, originally designed to withstand Montana winters, could stop bullets. Its large front windows offered clear lines of sight to every major approach to the bank, while the restored hayloft provided an elevated position overlooking the entire street. The transformation extended to the town's residents, though few realized. They were being subtly prepared for what was to come. Hawthorne's recommendations to the town council about improving street lighting and establishing fire brigades seemed practical enough, but each suggestion served a deeper purpose. Every new gas lamp created a predictable pool of light that could either expose or blind, depending on one's position. The fire brigade's water barrels, positioned at strategic intersections, could provide both emergency services and cover in a firefight. Even the literary society meetings began to shift in subtle ways. Discussions of military history and strategy became more frequent, with Hawthorne gently guiding conversations toward topics like urban warfare in ancient Rome or the defensive tactics of medieval cities. He introduced works like Clausewitz's On War alongside more traditional selections, seeding ideas about tactical thinking throughout the community. The town's children, always quick to adapt, began incorporating these changes into their play. Their games of cowboys and Indians evolved to include elements of strategy and positioning. Tommy Walsh proudly explained to his mother how he had won a game of hide-and-seek by thinking 3 moves ahead, a phrase he'd overheard during one of Hawthorne's discussions with the sheriff. As May progressed, the pressure in Silver Falls built like steam in a sealed boiler. More strangers arrived, each carrying themselves with the coiled tension of predators studying prey. They stayed at different hotels, frequented different saloons, never acknowledging each other, yet moving with an underlying coordination that spoke of careful planning. The stranger who called himself Edward Pierce made several return visits to Hawthorne's shop, each time purchasing books on military strategy or the history of warfare. During his last visit, he paused before leaving, studying a chess set displayed in the window. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he remarked, picking up the White King. "Though I've always preferred more practical games. Chess teaches us valuable lessons," Hawthorne replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The importance of position, the value of sacrifice, the art of making your opponent see exactly what you want them to see." Pierce replaced the piece with deliberate care. "Some might say it's just a game." "Every game has rules, Mr. Pierce. The trick is knowing which ones you can break and which ones will break you." After Pierce left, Hawthorne made another note in his ledger. Not about books sold or orders placed, but about the way Pierce had studied the bank's reflection in the chess set's polished wooden board. The pieces were indeed being moved into position, though not necessarily by the hands that thought they controlled the game. As darkness fell over Silver Falls that evening, the gas lamps cast their predictable pools of light along Main Street. But now those pools of light and shadow had become pieces on a much larger board, and a master strategist was preparing to demonstrate why the deadliest player isn't always the one with the fastest draw, but the one who can see every possible move before the game even begins. The evening brought new revelations about Hawthorne's careful preparations. Margaret Sullivan, the sheriff's wife and town librarian, noticed how the bookkeeper had begun organizing regular reading sessions for the town's younger men. These gatherings, ostensibly focused on classic literature, often veered into discussions of tactical scenarios drawn from historical battles. "It's fascinating how he uses stories to teach," she told her husband. "Yesterday's discussion of the Trojan horse led to a debate about the importance of watching for subtle changes in normal patterns. These aren't just literary discussions, they're lessons in survival." The town's stablemaster, Robert Blackwood, no relation to the infamous gang, contributed his own observations about the mysterious bookkeeper. "Been watching him exercise his horse before dawn," he shared with McPherson. "At the cafe. Man rides like a cavalry officer, always scanning the horizon, never following the same trial twice. That ain't the habit of someone who just sells books." Even the town's Chinese community, often kept at arm's length by frontier prejudices, had been drawn into Hawthorne's subtle web of preparation. Li Wei, the apothecary who supplied medicines to Dr. Harrison's practice, noted how Hawthorne had begun ordering unusual quantities of specific herbs, plants known for their properties in treating gunshot wounds and other trauma. "He knows things," Li Wei confided to his daughter Sarah. "Asks for medicines my grandfather used to prepare for battlefield surgeons during the Taiping Rebellion, not the knowledge of a simple merchant." The bank itself had undergone subtle changes under Hawthorne's indirect influence. His casual suggestions to Theodore Whitaker about improving security had led to modifications that seemed minor but could prove critical. The repositioning of telewindows to provide clear lines of sight, the installation of mirrors that offered views of blind spots, even the placement of heavily loaded strongboxes that could serve as impromptu cover. As the town prepared unknowingly for the coming storm, Hawthorne maintained his careful vigil. Each book sold, each conversation shared, each change implemented, formed part of a larger strategy. The legendary Lawman, who had once turned a box canyon into a killing field, was now transforming an entire town into an elaborate trap, though only he could see the complete design. That night, as Silver Falls settled into its evening routine, the gas lamps cast their carefully planned shadows across streets that had become more than just thoroughfares. They were now lanes of fire and fields of play in a deadly game where every pool of light and every patch of darkness had been measured, noted, and factored into a grand design that would soon prove why the most dangerous man on the frontier wasn't the fastest gun, but the most patient strategist. The evening brought an unexpected visitor to Hawthorne's shop. Judge Malcolm Reynolds, recently arrived from Helena to oversee the territory's circuit court, had heard whispers about the bookkeeper's unusual collection of military histories. The judge, a veteran of both courtroom battles and actual warfare, found himself intrigued by the precision with which Hawthorne had arranged his tactical references. "Interesting selection," Reynolds noted, examining a rare volume on Napoleon's Russian campaign. "Most frontier bookshops stick to dime novels and practical manuals. History offers valuable lessons, Your Honor," Hawthorne replied, watching the street's reflection in his carefully positioned window glass. "Especially about how overconfidence can turn victory into disaster." The conversation that followed revealed layers of knowledge that surprised even the experienced judge. Hawthorne's analysis of historical military failures showed an intimate understanding of how small miscalculations could cascade into catastrophic defeats. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the town's physician, had her own observations to add. She'd noticed how Hawthorne had begun suggesting specific medical supplies to her practice. Quick clot powders, specialized bandaging techniques, materials for treating traumatic injuries, she shared with Caroline Walsh. "He presents them as interesting historical medical facts, but these are battlefield medicine techniques I haven't seen since my time with the Army Medical Corps." The town's children, always keen observers of adult behavior, noticed other changes. Michael Chen had started a game among his friends called Hawthorne's Rules, where players had to move through town without being spotted from certain vantage points. The game had become surprisingly popular, though none of the children realized they were actually learning principles of urban warfare and tactical movement. Even the town's architecture seemed to respond to Hawthorne's subtle influence. When the council discussed renovations to the Crown Hotel, his casual suggestions about strengthening certain walls and adding specific window placements were adopted without question. Each modification served a dual purpose, improving the building's appearance while creating potential defensive positions. The arrival of new mining equipment provided another opportunity for Hawthorne's careful planning. Heavy machinery crates, supposedly awaiting transport to the mines, were positioned at strategic intersections. Their placement seemed random, but created natural choke points and cover that could prove crucial in the right circumstances. The town's social gatherings took on new significance under Hawthorne's guidance. The weekly chess club he'd started at, the Crown Hotel, attracted an unusual mix of participants. Young Tommy Walsh proved particularly adept, though he didn't realize the strategic principles he was learning extended far beyond the chessboard. "It's fascinating," Judge Reynolds remarked to Sheriff Sullivan after observing one such gathering. "He's teaching them to think tactically, without ever mentioning combat. These aren't just games, they're lessons in strategy and survival." As May drew to a close, the pressure in Silver Falls continued to build. More strangers arrived, each carrying themselves with the practiced ease of predators. They moved through town like pieces on a board, unknowingly following patterns that Hawthorne had anticipated and prepared for weeks in advance. The man who called himself Edward Pierce made one final visit to the bookshop, this time purchasing a treatise on urban combat in ancient Rome. As he left, he paused to study the chess set once more. "Fascinating game," he mused, picking up the Black King. "Though I've always found reality more unpredictable than any board game." Hawthorne's response carried the weight of experience. "The best players don't just see the board, Mr. Pierce. They see the space between moves, the moments where games are truly won or lost." That evening, as the sun set behind the Bitterroot Mountains, Silver Falls seemed to hold its breath. The carefully positioned gas lamps created their predictable patterns of light and shadow, each one now a piece in an elaborate trap waiting to be sprung. The town's residents went about their evening routines, unaware that they had become players in a grand strategy orchestrated by a man who had once turned the brutal chaos of frontier justice into a deadly science. Hawthorne stood in his shop's doorway, watching the street's reflection in his window. To passers-by, he appeared to be simply a bookkeeper closing up for the night, but his eyes tracked each shadow, each movement, each piece being moved into position by players who thought they controlled the game. The legendary Lawman, who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre, was preparing to demonstrate once again why the deadliest force on the frontier wasn't speed or firepower, but the patient calculation of a mind that could turn an entire town into a battlefield. The morning stage brought more than just mail and supplies to Silver Falls. Among the passengers was retired U.S. Marshal Daniel Cross, whose arrival caused a subtle shift in the town's atmosphere. At first glance, he appeared to be just another weather-beaten traveler, his silver hair and lined face suggesting years spent under frontier skies. But there was something in his bearing, in the deliberate way he studied his surroundings, that spoke of a man who had spent decades reading danger in the smallest details. Cross's first stop was the Silver Crown Cafe, where he ordered coffee and a vantage point that allowed him to observe both the street and his fellow patrons. His attention kept returning to the bookshop across the way, though he made no immediate move to visit it. "Interesting character, that bookkeeper of yours," he remarked to Caroline Walsh, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of too many years calling out warnings and orders. "How long has he been in town?" Caroline, wiping down the counter with practiced efficiency, shared what she knew about Hawthorne's arrival 2 years prior. "Showed up one spring morning, bought the old Webster place outright, turned it into quite the establishment. Man knows his books, can quote Shakespeare and Sun Tzu in the same breath." "Sun Tzu, you say?" Cross's weathered features showed a flicker of recognition. Interesting choice for a frontier bookshop. The marshal's presence drew other observations about Hawthorne from the town's residents. Elizabeth Harrison, tending to Cross's arthritic shoulder in her clinic, shared her own insights about the mysterious bookkeeper. "It's not just what he does," she explained, applying a poultice. "It's what he notices. A scuffle broke out in front of his shop last month. two miners arguing over a claim. Before anyone could blink, Hawthorne had them separated, moved like water, no wasted motion. But here's the thing. He'd positioned himself to control their access to weapons before they even knew they wanted to draw. At the telegraph office, Benjamin Drake had his own story to share. "Man sends more coded messages than anyone I've ever seen," he told Cross. "Different ciphers too, not your usual business codes. Reminds me of military dispatches I handled during the war." Throughout the day, Cross collected these observations like a prospector panning for gold. Each detail added to a picture that was beginning to align with memories he'd carried for 7 years, memories of a tactical genius who had turned frontier justice into a deadly science. The town's stablemaster, Robert Blackwood, provided another piece of the puzzle. "Way he cares for his horse," he explained, brushing down a mare in the afternoon heat. "Most folks see to their mounts out of necessity. Hawthorne treats him like a soldier would, checking for signs of being tampered with, varying feed times, never establishing patterns. Man's got military written all over him, if you know what to look for." Judge Reynolds, sharing an evening meal with Cross at the Crown Hotel, offered a more scholarly perspective. "His knowledge of military history is extraordinary," the judge remarked, cutting into his steak. "We were discussing the Battle of Thermopylae last week. His insights about using terrain to funnel superior forces into killing zones. Well, let's just say it wasn't the academic theory he was drawing from." The judge's words stirred something in Cross's memory. Reports he'd read about the Red Canyon Massacre, about how a legendary lawman had turned a simple box canyon into a perfect trap for some of the West's most notorious outlaws. Young Tommy Walsh, serving as an unofficial guide to the marshal, provided a child's perspective on the bookkeeper. "Mr. Hawthorne teaches us chess," he explained proudly. "Says it's not about taking pieces, but about controlling space, making your opponent go where you want them to go." Even the town's Chinese community, often overlooked by visitors, had keen insights to share. Li Wei, carefully measuring herbs in his shop, spoke of subtle patterns he'd observed. "Man moves like an old temple warrior," he told Cross in careful English. "Not in a hurry, but always ready. Knows the secret of waiting, patience like a mountain, but strikes like a snake when needed." Sarah Chen, helping her father with the laundry, had noticed how Hawthorne's clothes told their own story. "His shirts," she explained, folding clean linens. "Always pressed just so, but designed for quick movement. And the way he positions his vest, slight bulge on the left side. My uncle was a guard in Shanghai and carried his backup gun the same way." As evening approached, Cross made his way to the sheriff's office. William Sullivan was catching up on paperwork when the marshal entered, closing the door behind him. "Been watching your bookkeeper," Cross began without preamble. "Man's got a lot of people fooled, but you're not one of them, are you?" Sullivan set down his pen, choosing his words carefully. "Towns have their share of men with complicated pasts. As long as they keep the peace, I don't go digging. Even when that past might include orchestrating the deadliest single engagement in frontier law enforcement history." The sheriff's response was measured. "Way I see it, a man who can turn a box canyon into a perfect trap might have good reasons for wanting a quiet life. Might also be exactly the kind of man you want around when trouble's brewing." Cross nodded. Slowly, years of experience reading between the lines. "Been hearing about your recent visitors, well-dressed men asking too many questions about the bank. Reminds me of reports I've been getting about the Blackwood gang's methodology. They always send advanced scouts dressed like respectable businessmen. Always plan their moves carefully, almost like they're playing chess." Sullivan's tone suggested he'd had similar thoughts. "The thing about chess players," Cross replied, "is they sometimes forget they're not the only ones who can think several moves ahead. 7 years ago, I was part of the task force that investigated the Red Canyon Massacre. 27 outlaws, some of the meanest sons of bitches to ever curse the territory, all brought down through perfect planning and patience. Reports said the lawman who engineered it could think like his opponents, predict their moves, turn their own tactics against them. The sheriff absorbed this information in silence before speaking. Interesting thing about our bookkeeper, he's been subtly preparing the town for weeks, suggesting improvements to buildings, teaching tactical thinking through chess games, positioning, resources in ways that seem random but create perfect firing positions and fallback points. Man's building a battlefield, Cross concluded. Question is, does he know something we don't, or is he just being cautious? As night fell over Silver Falls, the marshal made one final stop. Standing outside Hawthorne's Books and Sundries, he studied the carefully arranged window display. The chess set that had drawn so much attention was still there, but Cross noticed something others might have missed. The pieces were arranged in a specific pattern, one he recognized from an old military textbook on urban combat formations. Through the window, he could see Hawthorne at his desk, seemingly absorbed in his ledger. But Cross recognized the posture, the subtle awareness of surroundings, the calculated positioning that kept every entrance in view while appearing completely at ease. The chess master, Cross muttered to himself, using a name he hadn't spoken. In 7 years, still playing the long game, still setting up his pieces. Question is, what kind of endgame are you planning this time? Inside the shop, Marcus Hawthorne made a final entry in his ledger. Not a sale or purchase, but a note about a silver-haired marshal who asked too many of the right questions. The pieces were indeed being positioned, but in a game far more complex than anyone in Silver Falls could imagine. The legendary Lawman, who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre, was preparing to demonstrate once again why the deadliest weapon on the frontier wasn't a gun or a badge, but a mind that could turn an entire town into a chessboard. Late that evening, more observations about Hawthorne emerged during an impromptu gathering at the Silver Crown Café. Maria Vasquez, who cleaned at the Crown Hotel, shared a curious detail with Marshal Cross about the bookkeeper's weekly chess club meetings. It's not just the games they play, she explained in careful English, her voice low. He tells stories between matches, old battles, ambushes, siege tactics, but he tells them like he was there. Last week, he described a Confederate cavalry raid so vividly that Mr. McPherson, who fought in that very battle, got pale as a ghost. McPherson himself, nursing a coffee nearby, elaborated on Maria's observation. The way he described the terrain, the tactical decisions, the mistakes made by both sides, those weren't details you'd find in any book. That's the kind of knowledge that comes from seeing the ground with your own eyes, from understanding how men think when their lives are on the line. Reverend Thomas Clark, the town's Presbyterian minister, contributed his own unique perspective. During last Sunday's service, I noticed him studying the church's architecture with unusual intensity. Next day, he suggested some improvements to the bell tower, modifications that would give clear lines of sight down every major street in town. The arrival of Judge Reynolds at the cafe added another layer to the evening's discoveries. He carried with him a telegram that had just arrived from Helena, marked urgent. Interesting report about our bookkeeper, he shared with Cross privately. The Treasury Department's been investigating a series of bank robberies across 3 territories. Patterns always the same. Well-dressed advance scouts, careful reconnaissance, precisely timed attacks. But here's the curious part. 7 years ago, these same tactics were used by a lawman to trap a gang in a box canyon. The report speculates it wasn't just the gang he was after. He was studying their methods, learning their patterns. Dr. Harrison, joining the conversation after finishing her evening rounds, shared a medical perspective that caught Cross's attention. His knowledge of wounds and trauma care is extraordinary. Last month, he recommended specific medical supplies, things I hadn't seen since field hospitals during the war. When I asked how he knew about such specialized equipment, he quoted from an obscure Army Medical Corps manual, word for word. As the night deepened, Samuel Chen, whose laundry business gave him unique insights into the town's residents, revealed another telling detail. "Mr. Hawthorne's clothes tell stories," he explained to Cross. "Hidden reinforcement in coat, special pockets sewn inside vest. Most interesting, powder burns on the right cuff, recently cleaned. Man still practices, but very careful to hide evidence." The town's newest deputy, James Wilson, fresh from the territorial marshal's office in Helena, added his own observations about Hawthorne's daily routines. "Man never walks the same route twice," he noted. "Always varies his timing, his paths, his stopping points. That's not civilian behavior, that's military counter-surveillance technique." Even the town's children contributed unwitting intelligence to Cross's growing dossier. Young Michael Chen described how Hawthorne had begun teaching them a new game. "He calls it shadow and light," the boy explained excitedly. "We have to move through town without being seen from certain windows. Winners are those who understand how to use buildings and shadows." As midnight approached, Cross found himself back at his hotel room, arranging his notes like pieces on a chessboard. Each observation, each detail, painted a picture of a man whose every action served multiple purposes. The quiet bookkeeper wasn't just hiding in Silver Falls. He was preparing it, transforming it piece by piece into an elaborate trap. A knock at his door revealed Sheriff Sullivan carrying a dusty file he'd dug out of his office archives. "Found something interesting," he said, spreading papers across Cross's desk. "Town records from when Hawthorne first arrived. Man bought his property in the most defensible part of town, then gradually began influencing development around it. Every suggestion to the town council, every building improvement he advocated, they all created what military men would call interlocking fields of fire." Cross studied the documents, his expression grave. "He's been planning this since the day he arrived. Question is, what made him choose Silver Falls? What did he see that made this town the perfect board for his next game?" The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, carried on telegraph wires and whispering rumors of the Blackwood Gang's most ambitious plan yet. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would prove once again why the most dangerous man on the frontier wasn't the fastest gun or the boldest outlaw, but the patient strategist who could turn an entire community into an elaborate killing field. Later that night, Cross paid a visit to the town's old-timer, Jacob Grizzly Matthews, who'd been Silver Falls' first blacksmith before arthritis forced him into retirement. Sitting on his porch overlooking the town, Matthews shared a perspective that added another layer to the mystery. "Been watching that bookshop since the day he opened it," Matthews revealed, his gnarled hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "Man didn't just buy a building, he bought a fortress. Those walls, original owner was paranoid about Indian raids, had them built double thick with steel plates between the layers. Hawthorne knew that before he ever set foot inside. Asked me specific questions about the construction before he bought it. Victoria Santos, who ran the town's only photography studio, contributed her own unique observations the next morning. He commissioned a series of photographs of the town, she explained, to Cross, laying out several detailed shots. Wanted specific angles, specific times of day, paid extra for multiple copies. Looking at them now, every photo captures key defensive positions and lines of sight. The town's resident surveyor, Albert Morrison, had been working on Silver Falls' expansion plans when he noticed something peculiar about Hawthorne's suggestions to the town council. "Every proposal he's made about street widening or building placement," Morrison explained, spreading his maps across Cross's table, "creates natural bottlenecks and defensive positions. Man's been designing a battlefield disguised as urban improvements. Even the local schoolteacher, Miss Eleanor Wright, had observations that caught Cross's attention. He donated a fascinating collection of books to the school. She shared during breakfast at the cafe. Military histories, tactical manuals disguised as adventure stories, even geometry books that focus heavily on calculating trajectories and angles. He's been educating the town's children in military science without anyone realizing it. The owner of the Silver Falls Gazette, Marcus Rivera, provided another perspective from his years of printing the town's news. Started noticing patterns in the stories Hawthorne would suggest for publication, Rivera explained, showing Cross old editions. Articles about historical sieges, features on town defense during Indian raids, even architectural pieces about defensive urban design. Man's been preparing the town's mindset as much as its physical space. As dawn approached, Cross found himself back in Sullivan's office, piecing together the final elements of the puzzle. The arrival of an urgent telegram from the Territorial. Marshall's office in Helena confirmed his growing suspicions. Blackwood Gang's pattern is incredibly sophisticated, Sullivan noted reading the report. They don't just rob banks. They transform entire towns into traps for lawmen who try to stop them. Turn every advantage of civilization against those sworn to protect it. Just like someone else we know, Cross replied grimly. Question is, who's really trapping who? The telegraph operator, Benjamin Drake, burst into the office with another urgent message. Wire from Butte, he announced breathlessly. Blackwood Gang hit the copper mine payroll transport, but here's the strange part. They left most of the money, just took enough to make it look real. Because it wasn't about the money, Crossy realized. They're establishing a pattern, making us think we know their game, just like Red Canyon 7 years ago. As the first light of dawn painted the mountain peaks, Marcus Hawthorne stood in his shop's doorway, watching the town come to life. To any observer, he appeared to be simply a bookkeeper preparing for another day of business. But Marshall Cross, observing from the hotel window, saw something else entirely, a grandmaster arranging his pieces for the deadliest game of his career. The man who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre wasn't just hiding in Silver Falls. He had spent 2 years transforming it into an elaborate trap, preparing for a confrontation that would make Red Canyon look like a simple skirmish. The question wasn't whether the Blackwood Gang would spring the trap, but whether anyone else in Silver Falls would survive the game that was about to begin. The change in Silver Falls began with a series of seemingly unrelated incidents. First, the regular morning stage arrived 2 hours late. Its driver, pale and shaken, he reported passing 3 well-dressed men on the mountain road, their horses bearing the distinctive brand of the Carson City stables, known gathering points for the Blackwood Gang's operations. Frank Morrison, the stage driver for 15 years, wasn't easily rattled. Something about them felt wrong, he explained to Sheriff Sullivan, while his hands trembled around a coffee cup at the Silver Crown. Way they watched the stage pass, like wolves sizing up prey, asked real specific questions about the town's schedule, banking hours, silver shipment times. Within hours, Theodore Whitaker at the Miners Exchange Bank reported unusual activity. 5 separate groups of investors had visited that morning, each requesting detailed tours of the facilities. Different men, same questions, Whitaker shared with Marshall Cross. All too interested in our security measures, vault design, guard rotations. The telegraph office recorded a surge in coded messages, their patterns matching known Blackwood Gang communications. Benjamin Drake, working a double shift, noticed something else. Messages are bouncing between 3 different offices, he explained to Cross. Same way they coordinated the Central City heist last year. Hawthorne observed these developments from his shop, making careful notes in his ledger. Each entry detailed more than just business transactions. They were precise. Observations of movements, patterns, and positions. When Edward Pierce made another appearance, this time with 2 associates, Hawthorne's response was subtle but significant. "Looking for anything particular today, gentlemen?" he asked, while his fingers traced patterns on his desk. Patterns that Marshal Cross, watching from across the street, recognized as old cavalry signal code for enemy scouts. The men claimed interest in historical texts about local mining operations, but their eyes kept straying to the bank visible through the shop's windows. As they browsed, Hawthorne made a show of rearranging his chess set, each piece placed with deliberate precision. To most observers, it would have appeared random, but Cross recognized the formation, a classic military flanking maneuver translated to chess pieces. Dr. Harrison's clinic saw an unusual influx of patients that afternoon. Rough-looking men, complaining of minor ailments, each taking too much interest in the building's layout and its proximity to the bank. "They're mapping exit routes," she later told Sullivan, "same way military scouts mark field hospitals as waypoints." The town's children were the first to notice another strange pattern. Tommy Walsh, playing his new shadow game, spotted unfamiliar. Men leaving small marks on buildings, chalk marks that Hawthorne had taught them to recognize as old military trail signs. "Found another one, Mr. Hawthorne," Tommy reported proudly, pointing to a seemingly innocent scratch near the bank's side entrance. "Just like you showed us. It means safe approach in Army code, right?" Hawthorne's response was carefully measured. But Marshal Cross, within earshot, noted how the bookkeeper immediately repositioned a water barrel to block that particular approach. The town's Chinese residents, often more observant due to their marginalized position, noticed other changes. Li Wei reported seeing strangers practicing unusual routes through town's back alleys. "Move like men preparing for battle," he told his daughter Sarah. "Same way Taiping soldiers world map urban warfare paths." Sarah Chen, delivering laundry to the Crown Hotel, observed groups of well-dressed men conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance in shifts. "Their time guard changes at the bank," she reported to Sheriff Sullivan. "Watch delivery schedules, test response times with small disturbances." As evening approached, more subtle signs appeared. Robert Blackwood reported strangers asking detailed questions about the stable's layout and horse availability. The Silver Falls Gazette received unusual requests for old articles about the bank's construction. Even the local assay office noted increased interest in their security procedures. Judge Reynolds, watching these developments from his temporary chambers above the bank, recognized patterns from his military days. "They're establishing multiple layers," he explained to Cross during an evening meeting, "creating confusion with legitimate business activities while mapping every aspect of the town." But it was Victoria Santos, from her photography studio's elevated position, who captured the most telling evidence. Her cameras, strategically placed at Hawthorne's earlier suggestion, documented the movements of Pierce and his associates. The photographs revealed a calculated pattern, each group of investors systematically covering different sectors of town, their movements coordinated with military precision. As night fell, Marshal Cross met with Sheriff Sullivan in the relative privacy of the jail. "They're good," Cross admitted, spreading out Victoria's photographs. "Professional. Military-trained, probably ex-Confederate cavalry from their movement patterns. But look here," he pointed to recurring figures in different photographs. "They don't realize they're being watched by someone who wrote their playbook." Sullivan studied the images. "Hawthorne's been 3 steps ahead since they arrived. Those defensive improvements he suggested, the strategic positions he's created, he's not just preparing for their attack. He's designing their entire approach." "Question is," Cross mused, "are we watching the same kind of trap he set at Red Canyon, or something even more elaborate?" The answer began to take shape as more players revealed themselves. A group of rougher-looking men arrived on the evening stage, taking rooms at different hotels. Their clothes and manner marked them as hired guns, the kind of men gangs employed for heavy work. The town's atmosphere shifted subtly, like the air before a storm. Regular customers at Noah Parker's saloon noted the presence of strangers who drank little but watched much. The Crown Hotel reported unusual nighttime activity, men moving between rooms, holding quiet meetings in odd hours. Hawthorne's response to these developments was characteristically subtle but comprehensive. His weekly chess club meeting featured problems that, Cross realized, mimicked urban combat scenarios. His reading recommendations to regular customers increasingly focused on historical sieges and defensive tactics. Even his window displays changed, each book carefully positioned to provide reflected views of different approaches to the bank. As midnight approached, Marshal Cross observed Hawthorne through the bookshop's window. The man who had orchestrated the Red Canyon Massacre was making final notations in his ledger, his movements unhurried but precise. On his desk, the chessboard displayed a complex game in progress, white pieces positioned in what appeared to be a vulnerable pattern, but Cross recognized it as a sophisticated trap from an old military manual. He's not just preparing for their attack, Cross realized. He's choreographing it, every defensive position, every escape route they're mapping. He's been designing their entire plan without them knowing it. This isn't just going to be a battle. It's going to be a performance, and Silver Falls is his theater. The pieces were indeed in motion, but the game being played was far more complex than even the Blackwood gang could imagine. The quiet bookkeeper who had spent 2 years preparing his stage was about to demonstrate why the most dangerous strategist isn't the one who moves the most pieces, but the one who makes his opponents move exactly as he intends. The next morning brought new developments that only a few in Silver Falls recognized as significant. Margaret Sullivan, organizing the library's weekly reading circle, noticed an unusual pattern in the books Hawthorne had recently donated. Military histories, engineering manuals, texts on urban planning, all carefully placed where certain visitors would find them, she reported to her husband, the sheriff. He's feeding them information, but I can't help wondering if it's exactly what he wants them to see. Eleanor Wright, teaching her morning mathematics class, observed 3 well-dressed men measuring paces along the schoolyard fence. They claimed to be property developers, she told Marshal Cross later, but their calculations, they were measuring fields of fire, just like in those geometry problems Mr. Hawthorne suggested for our advanced students. The town's undertaker, Jeremiah Black, contributed his own macabre observation. Had a stranger asking about our burial practices, he shared, during lunch at the Silver Crown. Wanted to know about plot locations, depth of graves. Said it was for a story about frontier traditions, but he was mighty interested in the soil composition near the bank. By mid-afternoon, more subtle changes appeared. Samuel Chen reported an increase in unusual laundry orders, new clothes being deliberately aged, trail dust carefully applied to expensive suits. Making clean men look trail-worn, he explained to Cross. Same technique used by Army scouts during war. The town's new telegraph operator, young William Drake, noticed another pattern in the coded messages. They're testing response times, he explained, showing Cross the log. Sending messages about false emergencies, watching how quickly different parts of town react. But here's the thing, Mr. Hawthorne suggested we practice emergency responses last month. We've been drilling these exact scenarios. At the Silver Falls Gazette, Marcus Rivera made a concerning discovery while reviewing past issues. Stories about bank robberies in other towns, he shared with Sullivan. Someone's been requesting copies, studying how each town responded. But looking at these reports now, I realize half of them came from Hawthorne's historical research suggestions. As evening approached, Victoria Santos developed a new batch of photographs that revealed more than just daily town life. Look at the shadows, she pointed out to Cross, laying out several images. These men, supposedly unconnected visitors, Their movements create perfect triangulation points around the bank, military formation disguised as casual wandering. Judge Reynolds, conferring with Cross in his chambers, added another piece to the puzzle. Received an interesting report from the Treasury Department, he revealed, producing a telegram. Blackwood Gang's last 3 robberies, each town had similar characteristics. Prominent bank, multiple approaches, strong law enforcement presence. They're not just hitting targets of opportunity, they're choosing battlefields. Just like Hawthorne chose this one, Cross mused. Question is, did they pick Silver Falls, or did he make them pick it? The town's gunsmith, Albert Morgan, reported an unusual surge in ammunition sales. Specific calibers, specific amounts, he detailed to Sullivan. Buying patterns match military requisition standards. Someone's planning for a coordinated action. As night settled over Silver Falls, more pieces fell into place. Robert Blackwood noticed strangers measuring horse speeds between specific points in town. Timing escape routes, he explained to Cross. But here's the thing, every route there. Testing? Hawthorne had us place water barrels or hitching posts along them last month, said it was for town convenience. Even the local priest, Father Michael O'Malley, contributed an observation during his evening walk. Strangers have been visiting the church, he reported, asking about bell schedules, tower access. One mentioned how the bells could mask other sounds, like gunfire. Marshal Cross, compiling these reports in his hotel room, began to see the larger pattern. Every preparation the Blackwood Gang was making had been anticipated and subtly shaped by Hawthorne's actions over the past 2 years. Each defensive measure, each town improvement, each suggested change had been designed to channel future events into specific patterns. He's not just predicting their moves, Cross realized. He's been choreographing them since before they even chose Silver Falls. Every detail they're discovering, every advantage they think they're finding, it's all part of his design. A late-night meeting with Sullivan in the sheriff's office confirmed his suspicions. Got word from Helena, Sullivan shared. The Treasury's been tracking Blackwood Gang's pattern. Each target is more ambitious than the last, each plan more complex. They're building towards something big. They think they're writing their masterpiece, Cross nodded. Don't realize they're actually performing someone else's. As midnight tolled from the church tower, Marcus Hawthorne stood at his shop window, watching the reflection of moving shadows. In the carefully positioned glass, each stranger's movement, each secret signal, each hidden preparation was exactly where he had planned for them to be. The man who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre was preparing for an encore performance that would remind the frontier why some legends are best left undisturbed. The final hours of that night revealed even more subtle preparations coming into play. Jacob Matthews, unable to sleep due to his arthritis, noticed unusual activity from his porch overlooking the town. Strangers testing sightlines from different buildings, he reported to Cross the next morning, using lanterns to signal between positions. Reminds me of artillery spotters during the war, establishing firing coordinates. The town's carpenter, Thomas Richardson, added his own observations while repairing the Crown Hotel's stairs. Been asked to make specific modifications to several buildings, he explained. Extra support beams, reinforced door frames, all requested months ago by Hawthorne through the town council. Now I'm watching these strangers check each modification like they're reading a map. Midnight brought a curious incident at the Silver Falls Gazette. Marcus Rivera, working late on the morning edition, observed several men studying old property maps of the town. They were particularly interested in the underground features, he told Sullivan. Mining tunnels, water systems, old cellars. Exactly the same areas Hawthorne had me write that historical piece about last spring. The town's newest resident, retired Army Major James Blackwood, no relation to the gang, recognized military precision in the strangers' movements. They're establishing what we called critical points during the war, he explained to Cross. Key positions that control movement through urban areas. But here's what's interesting. Every one of these positions has already been subtly reinforced or modified over the past 2 years. Even the local seamstress, Clara Martinez, contributed an important observation. These new customers, they're ordering clothes with specific modifications, she shared. Hidden pockets, reinforced seams, quick-release buttons, just like the designs Mr. Hawthorne suggested for the town militia's uniforms last year. The night watchman, elderly Peter McCarthy, reported strange patterns in the visitors' nocturnal activities. They're practicing something, he whispered to Cross, moving between buildings, timing guard rotations, but every route they choose, every position they take, it's all visible from certain points in town, points where Hawthorne suggested placing those new gas lamps. As dawn approached, Dr. Harrison made a disturbing discovery while organizing her medical supplies. These specialized trauma kits Hawthorne recommended, she told Sullivan. They're positioned throughout town in a specific pattern. Looking at it now, they're placed exactly where casualties would most likely occur during an urban battle. The first light of morning brought one final piece of intelligence. Benjamin Drake intercepted a coded message that sent him hurrying to the sheriff's office. "It's in the same cipher as the other Blackwood communications," he explained to Cross and Sullivan, "but this one's different. It's confirming specific details about the town's layout, defensive positions, and security patterns. Everything they think they've discovered through careful scouting." Marshal Cross, studying the decoded message, suddenly understood the full scope of what he was seeing. Every detail they're reporting, every advantage they think they've found, it's all been carefully crafted. Hawthorne hasn't just been preparing for their arrival. He's been writing their entire plan for them, piece by piece, for 2 years. Like a playwright, Sullivan mused, who spent years building his stage, positioning his props, preparing every detail for a performance only he can see clearly. "More than that," Cross replied grimly. "He's turned Silver Falls into more than just a stage. It's a trap that's been 2 years in the making. Every scout they send, every piece of intelligence they gather, just confirms what he wants them. To believe they think they're planning the perfect bank robbery, but they're really reading from his script," Sullivan finished. "Question is, what's the final act going to look like?" As the sun rose over Silver Falls, Marcus Hawthorne began his day like any other, opening his shop precisely on time. To anyone watching, he appeared to be simply a bookkeeper preparing for business. But Marshal Cross, observing from the sheriff's office, saw something else. A grandmaster who had spent years positioning every piece, preparing every move, crafting a strategy so complex that even his enemy's preparations were part of his design. The legendary Lawman, who had turned a simple box canyon into a killing field, was about to demonstrate that his greatest feat of strategic genius wasn't just about trapping his enemies. It was about making them think they were the ones setting the trap. The truth about Marcus Hawthorne's past arrived in Silver Falls not through rumor or legend, but in the form of a weathered journal delivered to Marshal Cross by special courier from the territorial office in Denver. The leather-bound volume, its pages yellow with age, contained the official after-action report of the Red Canyon Massacre, written by then-Captain James Morrison of the U.S. Cavalry. Cross read the account in the privacy of his hotel room, the morning light casting long shadows across pages that detailed one of the most meticulously planned operations in frontier law enforcement history. The document revealed a side of Hawthorne that went beyond the simple legend of a deadly lawman. Initial assessment suggested standard military training, Morrison's report began. But the subject's tactical approach demonstrated understanding. Far beyond conventional doctrine, suspect former military intelligence, possibly special operations under General Sherman during the March to the Sea. The report detailed how Hawthorne had spent 3 months preparing the canyon, studying the movement patterns of some of the West's most notorious outlaws. He didn't just track their locations, he learned to think like them, to predict their responses, to understand their decision-making processes at a fundamental level. Subject demonstrated extraordinary ability to predict hostile force movements, the report continued. Each defensive position, each line of fire, was positioned to exploit known behavioral patterns of specific gang leaders. Evidence suggests extensive psychological profiling, possibly drawing from military intelligence techniques. Judge Reynolds, reviewing the document with Cross, recognized elements from his own wartime experience. This wasn't just tactical planning, he observed, pointing to detailed maps included in the report. This was psychological warfare. He didn't just trap them physically, he manipulated their decision-making process at every step. The report revealed how Hawthorne had spent weeks laying false trails, planting information that would draw specific gangs to the canyon at precisely the right time. He didn't just create a killing field. He composed a deadly symphony where each target's predictable reactions became notes in a larger score. Dr. Harrison, treating Cross's old war injury, shared her own connection to the events. "I was stationed at Fort Laramie when they brought in the survivors," she recalled. 3 men, all suffering from more than just physical wounds. They kept talking about how every move they made seemed predicted. Every escape route they tried had been anticipated. Said it was like fighting a ghost who could read their minds. Victoria Santos produced photographs from her personal collection, images taken of Red Canyon shortly after the incident. "My father was the Army photographer assigned to document the scene," she explained, laying out the stark images. Said he'd never seen anything like it. Each position precisely placed, each angle calculated, called it mathematical murder. The details of Hawthorne's methodology emerged through careful study of the evidence. He hadn't just used the canyon's natural features, he had enhanced them, subtly modifying the terrain over months of preparation. Small changes that seemed insignificant alone, but worked together to create a perfect trap. Benjamin Drake's father, who had worked the telegraph office in Dodge City during that period, had kept personal records of the communications leading up to the massacre. "Wasn't just about the shooting," Drake explained, showing Cross his father's notes. "He spent months feeding specific information through various channels, building a picture that would draw exactly the right targets to exactly the right place." Li Wei, preparing medicines in his shop, shared stories he'd heard from Chinese railroad workers who had witnessed the aftermath. "Not just violence," he explained in careful English, "was like art of war from ancient scrolls. Know the enemy's mind, make them defeat themselves." The full scope of Hawthorne's strategic genius became clear as Cross pieced together multiple accounts. The Lawman hadn't just created an effective ambush, he had orchestrated a complex psychological operation that turned his target's own experience and confidence against them. "Look at these patrol patterns," Sullivan noted, studying the old reports. He used their own tactics against them. The more experience they had, the more predictable their responses became. Their expertise became a weakness. Each detail revealed layers of planning that went beyond simple military strategy. Hawthorne had studied individual gang members' histories, understanding how past experiences would influence their decisions under pressure. He didn't just predict their movements, he authored them. James McPherson, examining the tactical diagrams, with a veteran's eye, recognized elements from classical military theory. "This isn't just frontier justice," he observed. "These are advanced concepts from von Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, even ancient Roman texts. Man's got education far beyond what you'd expect." The psychological impact on the survivors proved particularly revealing. Those who lived through the massacre spoke of an almost supernatural experience, where every decision they made seemed to have been anticipated and countered before they even thought of it. One survivor described it like being caught in a chess game where all the moves were predetermined, Judge Reynolds noted, reading from official testimonies. Said it wasn't just about being outgunned or outmaneuvered, it was about being outthought at every turn. As Cross delved deeper into the accounts, patterns emerged that cast new light on Hawthorne's current activities in Silver Falls. The way he had prepared the canyon mirrored his methodical transformation of the town, each change serving multiple purposes, each modification part of a larger design. Theodore Whitaker, reviewing bank records from that period, discovered another layer of Hawthorne's preparation. He didn't just track their movements, Whitaker explained. He studied their financial patterns, understood their resource management, used their own logistics against them. The report included interviews with trackers who had studied the canyon. After the incident, they described how Hawthorne had used subtle marks and signs that only experienced outlaws would recognize, signals that seemed to promise safety but actually led into carefully prepared kill zones. Sarah Chen, translating passages from her grandfather's journal, added another perspective. Chinese workers in the area had observed Hawthorne's preparations without fully understanding their purpose. Grandfather wrote that he moved like water, she translated, gentle, patient, but wearing away at stone according to precise plan. As evening approached, Cross shared his conclusions with Sullivan in the privacy of the jail office. Red Canyon wasn't just a triumph of tactics, he explained. It was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. He didn't just kill those men, he made them participants in their own defeat. And now he's doing it again, Sullivan realized. Everything we're seeing in Silver Falls, the preparations, the positioning, the subtle manipulations, it's Red Canyon on a grand scale. The implications were staggering. The quiet bookkeeper hadn't chosen Silver Falls as a hiding place. He had selected it as his next theater of operations, spending 2 years preparing for a performance that would dwarf his previous work. Question is, Cross mused, studying the old reports by lamplight, what made him choose this moment to spring his trap? What does he see coming that the rest of us are still blind to? The answer lay hidden in the patterns of current events, in the subtle signs that only a master strategist could read. The man who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre wasn't just preparing for another battle. He was composing a symphony of violence where every participant would play their part, exactly as he had written it, whether they knew it or not. Late that night, more pieces of Hawthorne's past emerged through unexpected sources. Margaret Sullivan discovered an old cavalry dispatch book in the town library's archives, its pages containing coded messages that paralleled current events in Silver Falls. Look at these communication patterns, she showed Cross, highlighting specific entries. 3 months before Red Canyon, he established similar information networks. Carefully placed rumors, strategic leaks, all designed to shape his target's perceptions. Albert Morrison, the town surveyor, contributed another crucial insight while examining old territorial maps. Red Canyon wasn't his first choice, he revealed, spreading the yellow documents across his desk. He studied 3 different locations, but chose the canyon because it matched specific psychological criteria, made the targets feel in control right until the moment they weren't. The town's gunsmith, Morgan, shared a technical perspective he'd gained from examining weapons recovered after the massacre. Every bullet impact showed precise calculation, he explained. Wasn't just shooting to kill, he was controlling movement. Patterns through carefully placed fire, making them dance to his tune. Reverend Clark, researching old church records, discovered an account from a circuit preacher who had witnessed the aftermath. The minister wrote that it wasn't just violence he saw in that canyon, he read from the faded pages. It was the work of a mind that understood the architecture of fear itself. A letter arrived from Helena, carrying the recollections of a former territorial marshal who had studied the Red Canyon incident. Hawthorne didn't just understand tactics, the letter stated. He understood men. knew how pride makes them predictable, how experience becomes a cage that limits their thinking. As midnight approached, Cross received another document that added crucial context. It was a psychological assessment prepared by an army physician who had interviewed survivors of Red Canyon. Subjects display unusual trauma patterns, the report noted, not just from the violence experienced, but from the profound psychological impact of realizing every decision they made had been anticipated and countered. James McPherson, unable to sleep, shared battlefield wisdom gained from his own military experience. What Hawthorne did at Red Canyon, he explained over late-night coffee, wasn't just about killing. It was about controlling the space between decisions, the moments where battles are really won or lost. The testimonies of witnesses who had arrived after the massacre painted a picture of calculated precision that went beyond simple combat. Each position had been prepared with multiple purposes, not just for tactical advantage, but to exploit specific psychological weaknesses of his targets. He studied their histories, Judge Reynolds noted, reviewing court records from previous cases against the gang members, knew which men would take which risks, which leaders would make specific choices under pressure, turned their patterns into weapons against them. Even the town's children contributed to understanding Hawthorne's methodology. Tommy Walsh, describing the chess lessons he'd received, unknowingly revealed principles that mirrored strategies used at Red Canyon. Mr. Hawthorne says winning isn't about the moves you make, the boy explained. It's about making your opponent think the moves they want to make are their own idea. As dawn approached, Marshal Cross compiled these new insights in his journal, seeing how they connected to current events in Silver Falls. The patterns were clear. Hawthorne wasn't just reusing successful tactics. He was elevating them to an art form, transforming an entire town into a complex trap that would dwarf his previous work. Red Canyon was just the rehearsal, Cross realized, sharing his conclusions with Sullivan as the first light painted the mountains. Everything he learned there, every technique he perfected, it was all preparation for this moment. He's not just planning to stop a bank robbery. He's orchestrating something that will be studied for decades. The quiet bookkeeper who had spent 2 years preparing Silver Falls wasn't just hiding from his past. He was preparing to surpass it. The legend of Red Canyon was about to become a prologue to an even more extraordinary demonstration of strategic genius, where an entire town would become both stage and weapon in the hands of a master strategist. As the investigation deepened, Victoria Santos uncovered a series of photographs from her father's collection that shed new light on Hawthorne's methodology. The images, taken during a military investigation of Red Canyon, revealed subtle details previously overlooked. "Look at these markings," she pointed out to Cross, using a magnifying glass. He didn't just use the canyon's natural features, he modified them, created false trails that looked decades old, even carved ancient Indian signs that would draw experienced trackers into specific positions. Dr. Harrison, examining medical records from the aftermath, discovered another layer of Hawthorne's planning. He positioned his shots with surgical precision, she explained. Even in the heat of battle, every wound was calculated, not just to disable, but to create specific responses in the survivors. He understood how injured men would affect their companions' decisions. A dusty journal arrived from a retired army scout who had studied the canyon site. His observations revealed how Hawthorne had used the region's weather patterns as part of his strategy. He chose the location partly for how sound carried through the canyon, Cross read from the journal, created acoustic illusions that made his forces seem larger, more widespread. Benjamin Drake's research into old telegraph records revealed another dimension of preparation. He spent months establishing false identities across 3 territories. Drake explained. Created entire networks of seemingly unrelated contacts, all feeding specific information to his targets. Made them think they were gathering intelligence, when really they were following his script. The town's blacksmith, examining old equipment, recovered from the canyon, contributed technical insights. These weren't just ordinary trail markers, McPherson noted, studying metalwork found at the site. They're sophisticated surveying tools, disguised to look like prospectors' claims. Man was mapping fields of fire with mathematical precision. Judge Reynolds' legal research uncovered testimony from a gang member who'd avoided the massacre by arriving late. Said it was like the canyon itself was alive, Reynolds read from the court transcript. Every rock, every shadow, seemed positioned to guide them exactly where Hawthorne wanted them to go. Li Wei's father, who had supplied medicines to army posts during that period, shared stories passed down through Chinese merchants. Not just battle, Li Wei translated from his father's diary, was like ancient siege warfare. Control the enemy mind first, make them defeat themselves before the first shot is fired. Clara Martinez, working late at her seamstress shop, recalled stories from her grandfather, who had been a scout for the territorial marshals. Said Hawthorne spent weeks living in the canyon before the operation, she shared, learning every echo, every shadow. Said he could navigate it blindfolded by the time he was done. The town's undertaker, examining old burial records, discovered another pattern. The casualties weren't random, Jeremiah Black explained. Each death served a purpose, taking out specific skills and capabilities in an order that maximized confusion among the survivors. As midnight approached, Marshal Cross assembled these final pieces of the puzzle in his hotel room. The full scope of Hawthorne's genius at Red Canyon went beyond military strategy or law enforcement tactics. He had created a new form of psychological warfare where every detail served multiple purposes, and even the survivors became unwitting messengers of his legend. Red Canyon wasn't just about stopping outlaws, Cross concluded, sharing his findings. With Sullivan, it was about creating a reputation so powerful it would affect future operations. Every survivor's story, every rumor that spread, it was all part of a longer game. The implications for Silver Falls became clearer with each revelation. The quiet bookkeeper hadn't been hiding these past 2 years. He had been evolving his methods, preparing to demonstrate that Red Canyon had been merely a preview of his capabilities. He's not just recreating his past success, Sullivan realized. He's using everything he learned there as the foundation for something even more sophisticated. The whole town isn't just a trap. It's an instrument he's tuned to perfection. The first light of dawn found Cross standing at his window, watching Hawthorne open his shop with characteristic precision. The legendary Lawman, who had turned a box canyon into a killing field, was about to demonstrate that his greatest triumph hadn't been the massacre itself, but the way it had prepared him for this moment, when an entire town would become his masterpiece of strategic warfare. The true nature of the Blackwood Gang's operation in Silver Falls began to reveal itself through a series of carefully orchestrated moves. Clayton Blackwood himself never appeared in town, a departure from his usual methods that caught Marshal Cross's attention. Instead, his influence manifested through the precise coordination of his advanced teams. Edward Pierce, now revealed as the gang's chief strategist, continued his careful dance of reconnaissance. But there was something different about his methods, something that set this operation apart from their previous heists. They're not just planning a robbery, Cross explained to Sullivan, watching Pierce measure paces along Main Street. Look at the precision, the attention to detail. They're treating this like a military operation. The marshal's suspicions were confirmed when Victoria Santos developed photographs of the gang's advance teams. The images revealed a pattern of coordination that went beyond simple criminal enterprise. Each group had specific roles, moving through town with military precision. "These aren't common bandits," McPherson observed, his veteran's eye catching. "Details others missed. See how they maintain formation even while appearing casual. That's cavalry training. Confederate, probably Mosby's Rangers from their movement patterns." Benjamin Drake, monitoring telegraph traffic, detected an elaborate communication network. "They're using multiple ciphers," he reported, spreading coded messages across Sullivan's desk. "Military grade, but with adaptations I've never seen before. It's like they're evolving standard army protocols." The gang's preparation revealed layers of sophistication that surprised even Cross. Their scouts didn't just map the town, they studied its rhythms, its patterns, the daily flow of life that could affect their operation. Each team had specific assignments, gathering different pieces of a larger puzzle. Dr. Harrison, treating a supposed mining investor's minor injury, noticed technical diagrams partially visible in his coat pocket. "Detailed schematics," she later told Cross. "Not just of the bank, they're mapping every major building's structural weaknesses." The town's Chinese residents, often overlooked by visitors, provided crucial insights into the gang's movements. Li Wei reported seeing late-night meetings in the stables, where men practiced complex maneuvers using miniature models of the town. "Not just planning robbery," he explained to Sarah. "Planning conquest, same way Emperor's generals would study the city before the siege." Judge Reynolds, reviewing military records from the war, made connections that deepened the mystery. "Half these tactics they're using, they're adapted from Confederate cavalry raids. But they've been refined, evolved beyond standard military doctrine." The gang's technical preparation proved equally sophisticated. Albert Morgan, the gunsmith, reported unusual modifications being requested for weapons. "These aren't typical outlaw specs," he explained. "These are precision adjustments, the kind you'd see in military sharpshooting units." As evening approached, more pieces of the Blackwood gang's design emerged. Clara Martinez, working late at her shop, overheard conversations between Pierce's men that revealed the true scope of their ambition. "They're not just talking about the bank," she reported to Sullivan. "They're discussing how to control the whole town, treating it like a military objective, not just a target." The sophistication of their planning extended to every detail. Robert Blackwood noticed them timing horse relays between specific points, establishing precise coordination for rapid movement through town. "They're creating a mobile reserve force," he explained to Cross. "Military concept, adapted for urban terrain." Even the town's children contributed to understanding the gang's methodology. Tommy Walsh, playing his shadow game, unknowingly mapped their surveillance patterns. "The new men always watch from the same spots," he reported proudly to Hawthorne, "like they're guarding invisible lines through town." As night fell, Marshal Cross assembled these observations in Sullivan's office, building a picture of an operation that went beyond anything in the Blackwood gang's history. "They're not just getting more ambitious," he explained. "They're evolving, adapting military strategy to criminal enterprise. This isn't just about money. They're treating Silver Falls like a test case for something bigger." The evidence suggested the gang had spent months planning this operation, establishing elaborate networks of support and intelligence. Their advanced teams hadn't just studied the bank, they'd analyzed every aspect of town life that could affect their operation. "Look at these supply caches," Sullivan pointed out on the town map, marking locations where suspicious deliveries had been noted. "They're not just planning a quick raid, they're preparing for extended operations, maybe even planning to hold the town for ransom." The gang's psychological preparation proved equally thorough. They had planted rumors in neighboring towns, establishing false patterns to mislead any potential response. Their scouts had cultivated specific relationships, gathering intelligence while building covers that would survive casual investigation. Theodore Whitaker, the bank president, revealed another layer of their preparation during a late-night meeting with Cross and Sullivan. "They're not just studying our security," he explained, spreading bank documents across the desk. "They're analyzing our business patterns, understanding how money moves through town. They've even opened legitimate accounts to track internal procedures." Marcus Rivera of the Silver Falls Gazette discovered their influence extended to the press. "You've been getting strange requests for old articles," he shared. "Stories about bank security, town events, patrol schedules, building a detailed timeline of town life." The town's stablemaster contributed crucial insights into their logistics. "They're establishing horse relays at specific points around town," Robert Blackwood explained. "Not just for escape. They're creating rapid response teams, military-style quick reaction forces." Victoria Santos, from her photography studio's vantage point, documented patterns that revealed military precision. "Their scouts move in coordinated shifts," she noted, showing Cross a series of photographs. "Each team has specific zones, overlapping, in coverage, like army reconnaissance units." The gang's technical sophistication became clearer when William Drake intercepted more coded messages. "They're using multiple layers of encryption," he explained to Sullivan. "Base military cipher with custom modifications. Some messages carry hidden messages within decoy content." Judge Reynolds, reviewing territorial law enforcement reports, noticed a pattern in the gang's evolution. "Each operation is more sophisticated than the last," he observed. "They're not just learning from experience, they're systematically testing and refining military tactics for criminal application." Peter McCarthy, the night watchman, reported elaborate counter-surveillance methods. "They watch the watchers," he explained, "have men dedicated to spotting lawmen, identifying undercover agents, professional military screening techniques." Eleanor Wright, the schoolteacher, unknowingly observed their psychological warfare tactics. "New families in town," she reported. "Children enrolled in school, establishing community presence, building sympathy networks in case things go wrong." The gang's attention to detail extended to medical preparation. Dr. Harrison discovered they had established their own medical support network. "They've got trained field medics," she realized, "positioned emergency supplies, planned casualty collection points, military-grade medical preparation." James McPherson, watching their weapons preparation, recognized sophisticated military armory practices. "They're not just stockpiling guns," he explained. "They're creating balanced weapons teams, establishing interlocking fields of fire. Professional military unit tactics." As midnight approached, Father O'Malley provided an unexpected insight from his evening confessional. "They're not just planning violence," he shared with Cross. "They're preparing for the aftermath, establishing means to control town through fear and influence after initial action." Samuel Chen noticed patterns in their laundry that revealed military attention to equipment maintenance. "Clean uniforms. Weekly," he explained. "Different clothes for different roles. Keep equipment ready like soldiers, not bandits." The gang's influence had even reached the town council. Margaret Sullivan discovered they had agents attending meetings, subtly influencing town planning decisions. "They're shaping the battlefield," she realized, using legitimate channels to create tactical advantages. Albert Morrison, the surveyor, found evidence of their long-term planning in town development proposals. "They've been influencing construction in projects," he explained, showing cross-modified building plans, creating hidden strongpoints, escape routes disguised as civic improvements. As dawn approached, Cross assembled these new insights in his hotel room, seeing how each piece fit into an elaborate design. The Blackwood gang wasn't just planning another bank robbery. They were implementing a sophisticated military operation adapted for criminal enterprise. "Look at this progression," he explained to Sullivan, spreading reports across his desk. "Each operation is more complex, each plan more sophisticated. Silver Falls isn't just another target, it's the culmination of years of development. The evidence painted a picture of an organization that had systematically evolved from simple banditry to professional military-style operations. Their preparation included elements of psychological warfare, urban combat tactics, and advanced logistics that went far beyond typical criminal methodology. They're not just getting better at robbery, Sullivan realized. They're developing a new kind of warfare, blending military doctrine with criminal enterprise. Silver Falls is their testing ground for something revolutionary. What neither the gang nor the lawman yet realized was that their elaborate preparation was playing directly into Hawthorne's design. The more sophisticated their plan became, the more perfectly it aligned with the trap he had spent 2 years preparing. The quiet bookkeeper watched their preparations from his shop window, each new development confirming his predictions. The legendary strategist who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre was about to demonstrate why the most dangerous trap isn't the one that stops your advance. It's the one that encourages you to proceed exactly as planned. Late that night, more elements of the Blackwood Gang's sophisticated operation came to light. Jeremiah Black, the undertaker, discovered they had even prepared for casualties with military precision. "They've arranged for special coffins," he reported to Cross, "designed for rapid transport, like ones used by Army mobile field units. They're planning for every contingency." The town's printer, Thomas Webb, noticed unusual orders that revealed another layer of preparation. "They're creating multiple sets of documents," he explained. "Letters of credit, business papers, official-looking forms, building cover stories that could withstand serious investigation." Catherine Reynolds, the judge's wife who ran the town's Ladies' Aid Society, observed their social infiltration tactics. New families joining church groups, attending social functions, she noted, creating networks of unwitting sympathizers who could provide alibis or support. The local assay office reported subtle probing of the town's financial networks. "They're not just studying money flow," explained Marcus Thompson, the chief assayer. "They're mapping how news travels, how information moves between businesses, understanding the town's nervous system." Benjamin Drake's continued analysis of their communications revealed sophisticated contingency planning. "Each team has multiple fallback plans," he explained. "Alternate routes, secondary objectives, emergency protocols. It's like reading Army field manuals." Even the town's youngest residents unknowingly contributed to understanding their methods. Michael Chen observed their systematic testing of town responses. "They create small disturbances," he reported to Tommy Walsh. "Watch how people react, how fast help comes, like they're timing a complex dance." Dr. Harrison's further investigation of their medical preparation showed military-grade planning. "They've established casualty collection points," she explained, "prepared specific treatments for different scenarios, even have blood supplies arranged through legitimate channels." The town's carpenter, Thomas Richardson, discovered their attention to structural detail. "They've been studying building designs," he shared. "Not just for access, they understand load-bearing walls, structural weaknesses, planning for possible demolition or fortification." Isabella Rodriguez, who ran the town's best restaurant, noticed their careful cultivation of local contacts. "Different men, same pattern," she observed. "Build relationships with key townspeople, learn routines, gather intelligence through casual conversation, professional information gathering." As midnight deepened, Marshal Cross received intelligence from neighboring towns that completed the picture. The Blackwood Gang had been systematically establishing support networks throughout the territory, creating layers of legitimacy that would survive initial scrutiny. "Look at this pattern," he showed Sullivan, mapping their known operations. Each Robbery is more sophisticated, but also more integrated with legitimate business. They're not just stealing, they're building a shadow economy. Victoria Santos's latest photographs revealed their elaborate counter-surveillance methods. They watch in shifts, she explained, showing across the evidence. Each observer is covered by others, multiple layers of security, professional military screening techniques. The town's blacksmith contributed technical insights into their equipment preparation. They're not just maintaining weapons, McPherson noted. They're modifying them for specific roles, creating specialized tools for different aspects of the operation. Professional armory work. As dawn approached, the full scope of the Blackwood gang's evolution became clear. They had transformed from simple outlaws into a sophisticated military-style organization, capable of complex operations that blended legitimate business with criminal enterprise. This isn't just another bank robbery, Cross concluded, sharing his final analysis with Sullivan. This is the culmination of years of development, the perfect fusion of military tactics and criminal ambition. They think Silver Falls will be their masterpiece. What they couldn't know was that every element of their sophisticated plan, every careful preparation, every contingency they developed was leading them deeper into Hawthorne's elaborate trap. The legendary Lawman had spent 2 years ensuring that the more professional and prepared they became, the more perfectly they would play into his design. The stage was set for a confrontation that would demonstrate why the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who matches your sophistication. It's the one who has already turned that sophistication into a weapon against you. The transformation of Silver Falls into Hawthorne's grand design accelerated with the precision of a master clockmaker assembling his finest work. Each piece, each movement, each subtle adjustment served multiple purposes in his elaborate strategy. The first sign of his counter-preparation came through Victoria Santos's morning photographs. She captured Hawthorne making subtle adjustments to seemingly random objects throughout town, moving a water barrel here, suggesting the placement of a hitching post there, each modification creating what military men would recognize as interlocking. Fields of fire. Look at these angles, Marshal Cross explained to Sullivan, studying the photographs. He's not just creating defensive positions. He's building a network of coverage that will force them to move exactly where he wants them. Dr. Harrison noticed Hawthorne's medical preparations taking on new significance. He's not just stockpiling supplies, she observed, inventorying the latest deliveries. He's positioning specific treatments at strategic points, anticipating exactly where and how men will be wounded. The town's children became unwitting participants in his design. Tommy Walsh proudly demonstrated the new game Hawthorne had taught. Them, a modified version of hide-and-seek that unknowingly trained them to recognize and report suspicious movements through town. The rules are simple, Tommy explained to Michael Chen. You can't move between points unless you've checked for watchers first. Mr. Hawthorne says it develops good habits. Benjamin Drake's telegraph office became a key point in Hawthorne's information network. The bookkeeper had established a sophisticated system of seemingly innocent messages that could carry hidden meanings. Each regular business telegram contains potential code words, Drake explained to Cross. Simple phrases that can convey complex, tactical information without alerting monitors. The physical transformation of Silver Falls continued with subtle precision. Albert Morrison, reviewing construction plans, realized how Hawthorne had been systematically modifying the town's architecture. Every improvement serves multiple purposes, the surveyor noted, spreading blueprints across his desk. New awnings provide shade, but also conceal upper windows. Reinforced hitching posts double as cover. Even the new street grading creates natural defensive positions. Li Wei, watching from his shop, observed Hawthorne's methodical weapons preparation. Not just cleaning guns, he told Sarah in Mandarin. creating balanced positions like ancient fortress designs. Each point supports others, no weak spots. The town's stables underwent subtle modifications under Hawthorne's guidance. Robert Blackwood found himself implementing changes that seemed minor but served greater purposes. He suggested new stall arrangements, the stablemaster explained, creates clear lanes for mounted movement while channeling attackers into predictable paths. Even the town's social gatherings became part of Hawthorne's design. Caroline Walsh noticed how his chess club discussions increasingly focused on specific tactical scenarios. He uses historical battles as examples, she told Cross. But the situations he describes, they're all about controlling movement through urban spaces, exactly like our town. Judge Reynolds, watching these preparations unfold, recognized elements from classical military theory. He's not just creating a defensive plan, the judge observed. He's composing a symphony of conflict where every note is predetermined. The town's physical transformation continued at multiple levels. Thomas Richardson, the carpenter, found himself implementing Hawthorne's subtle architectural modifications throughout Silver Falls. Started with the bank's interior, Richardson explained to Cross, reinforced certain walls, adjusted door hinges to swing in specific ways, then moved outward, building by building, creating what he called flow patterns through town. Margaret Sullivan's work in the library took on new significance as she realized how Hawthorne had been strategically placing certain books where the Blackwood Gang's scouts would find them. Military histories, tactical manuals, all carefully selected, she noted, each one suggesting specific strategies that would appeal to their military background. He's feeding them ideas, but only the ones he wants them to consider. The town's newspaper became another instrument in Hawthorne's orchestration. Marcus Rivera found himself printing stories that seemed innocent but carried subtle messages, articles about town improvements, security measures, even historical pieces, Rivera explained. Each one designed to shape how outsiders view our vulnerabilities and strengths. He's controlling the information they're gathering. Victoria Santos discovered how Hawthorne had turned her photography studio into a sophisticated surveillance post. He suggested specific camera positions months ago, she revealed, each one covering key approaches and gathering points. We've been documenting their movements without realizing it. The town's Chinese community played a crucial role in his preparation. Li Wei's herb shop became a hub for a sophisticated information network. Delivery boys carry messages with herbs. Li Wei explained, customers from other towns bring news. All flow through shops like streams joining rivers. Mr. Hawthorne sees the whole picture. Dr. Harrison's medical preparations revealed another layer of strategic planning. He's not just anticipating casualties, she observed, reviewing her supplies. He's positioning treatments to support specific tactical movements. The pattern of medical caches tells its own story about where he expects the action to unfold. The transformation extended to the town's social fabric. Eleanor Wright noticed how Hawthorne's influence had subtly modified school routines, changed the timing of classes, suggested new walking routes for children, she explained, creating clear zones in town where civilians won't be present at crucial moments. James McPherson's blacksmith shop became a key point in the defensive preparation. Been modifying tools, creating equipment that looks ordinary but serves tactical purposes, he shared. Everything from reinforced wagon wheels to specially balanced throwing knives disguised as common tools. The town's religious life wasn't exempt from Hawthorne's planning. Father O'Malley found himself adjusting church schedules at the bookkeepers. Subtle suggestion changed the bell-ringing pattern, the priest noted, created a system that could serve as signals if needed. Even the morning prayers now follow a timeline that keeps people away from certain areas at specific times. Benjamin Drake's continuing analysis of telegraph traffic revealed how Hawthorne had established a sophisticated early warning system. Regular business messages carry coded indicators, he explained. Weather reports, market prices, shipping, notices, all part of a larger pattern that tracks movement throughout the territory. The town's stables underwent further modification under Hawthorne's guidance. Created special stalls near strategic points, Robert Blackwood demonstrated. Quick-release mechanisms, prepared mounts positioned for rapid response. Turned the whole stable into a cavalry command post. Even the town's children's games evolved to serve his strategy. Tommy Walsh proudly showed Cross the new version of their shadow game. Now we have to report certain types of movement, the boy explained. Mr. Hawthorne says it's important to notice patterns, like when strangers walk the same path too many times. The town's undertaker found himself drawn into the preparation. He had me modify certain coffins, Jeremiah Black revealed, reinforce them in ways that could serve as emergency barricades. Said it was about dignity, but I recognize military engineering when I see it. As evening approached, Marshal Cross assembled these observations in Sullivan's office, seeing how each element served multiple purposes in Hawthorne's design. Look at this pattern, he explained, mapping the changes. Each modification supports at least 3 different tactical options. He's not just preparing defenses, he's creating a mechanism where every piece can adapt to changing circumstances. Sullivan studied the map with growing appreciation. He's turned the whole town into a giant chess game, the sheriff realized, but one where all the pieces can serve different functions depending on how the battle develops. The sophistication of Hawthorne's preparation became clearer as they traced how each element could shift roles depending on circumstances. A defensive position could become an attack point. A safe route could become a trap, all depending on how the enemy moved. This isn't just tactical planning, Cross observed. This is strategic artistry. He's creating a battlefield that can transform itself based on the enemy's choices, making their own decisions work against them. As night fell, over Silver Falls, the quiet bookkeeper made his final preparations. Each piece was in position, each element carefully tuned to respond exactly as needed when the moment came. The legendary strategist who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre was about to demonstrate that his greatest achievement wasn't just preparing for battle. It was creating a living mechanism of conflict that would turn his enemy's every move into another step toward their own defeat. Late that night, more elements of Hawthorne's intricate preparation emerged. Catherine Reynolds, organizing the town's social calendar at her husband's request, discovered how he had subtly influenced community events. Each gathering, each social function has been carefully timed, she explained to Cross, creating predictable patterns of civilian movement that leave certain areas clear at specific times. He's choreographing the entire town's daily life. The town's gunsmith revealed another layer of tactical preparation. Been modifying weapons in specific ways, Albert Morgan demonstrated, creating specialized tools for different positions around town. Each one designed for particular angles and distances, like pieces in a complex puzzle. Clara Martinez, working late at her seamstress shop, shared observations about Hawthorne's attention to personal preparation. He orders clothes with hidden features, she noted, reinforced panels, concealed pockets, quick-release seams, everything designed for combat while appearing perfectly normal. Samuel Chen's laundry business provided insights into the scale of preparation. Different clothes, for different roles, he explained. Some for fighting, some for quick movement, some for blending in. Complete wardrobes ready for any situation. Isabella Rodriguez noticed how even the town's food supply had been incorporated into Hawthorne's strategy. He's arranged food caches throughout town, she revealed. Preserved supplies hidden in cellars and storerooms, preparing for extended operations. The town's surveyor made a crucial discovery while reviewing old maps. "He's been studying underground features," Albert Morrison explained. "Old mining tunnels, forgotten cellars, creating a whole network of hidden movement routes beneath the streets." Peter McCarthy's night watch rounds revealed new aspects of Hawthorne's defensive design. "Every shadow, every corner serves a purpose," the watchman noted. "Created clear zones and blind spots that channel movement in specific ways." William Drake identified another layer of communication preparation. "He's established backup signal systems," the telegraph operator explained. "Lights, sounds, even the pattern of washing hung on lines. Everything can carry messages if the telegraph fails." As dawn approached, Marshal Cross realized how Hawthorne had prepared not just the town's physical space, but its psychological terrain. Every element was designed to influence how people, both defenders and attackers, would think and behave under pressure. "Look at this pattern," he showed Sullivan. "Each preparation has both physical and psychological components. He's not just creating tactical advantages, he's shaping how people will respond to them." The town's printer added final insights into Hawthorne's attention to detail. "Been printing special maps," Thomas Webb revealed. "Different versions showing different aspects of town, some highlighting escape routes, others showing defensive positions, each designed for specific roles in whatever he's planning." The first light of morning revealed Silver Falls transformed, not just physically, but fundamentally. Every element, from the largest building to the smallest detail, had been tuned to serve Hawthorne's grand design. The quiet bookkeeper stood in his shop doorway, surveying his work with the satisfied eye of a master craftsman. Each piece was in position, each element prepared to play its part in the coming performance. The man who had turned a box canyon into a killing field had spent 2 years creating something far more sophisticated, a living battlefield that would think and react, turning his enemies' every action into another step in their own undoing. The stage was set for a demonstration of strategic genius that would make the Red Canyon massacre look like a simple prelude to his true masterpiece. Theodore Whitaker noticed the shift first among his bank employees. Their daily routines had evolved into something more purposeful, each movement and position carefully considered. Even the way they handled customers showed new awareness of tactical positioning. "They're not just tellers anymore," he explained to Marshal Cross. "Without realizing it, they've become sentries. The way they watch customers, track movements, maintain lines of sight, it's like they're soldiers manning a fortress." The town's children demonstrated the most dramatic transformation. Their games had evolved beyond simple play, incorporating elements of tactical awareness that would have impressed military scouts. Tommy Walsh and his friends had developed an intricate system of signals and observations. "We keep score differently now," Tommy explained proudly. "Points for spotting strangers, bonus marks for noticing patterns. Mr. Hawthorne says good observation is life's most valuable skill." Dr. Harrison observed changes in how townspeople approached health and safety. "They're thinking preventatively," she noted during her morning rounds, "positioning themselves with clear escape routes, maintaining awareness of surroundings. Basic survival instincts are becoming second nature." The town's Chinese community, often operating on the margins of frontier society, found themselves integral to the new order. Liwei's herb shop had become a sophisticated information hub where seemingly casual conversations carried deeper significance. "Traditional wisdom says the best defense is being prepared," he told Sarah in Mandarin. Town learned this truth without knowing the teacher. Benjamin Drake noticed how casual conversations at the telegraph office had taken on new meaning. "People share observations naturally now," he explained. "Weather changes, visitor patterns, unusual activities, everything gets reported through everyday chat. The transformation affected every level of town life. Carolyn Walsh found her cafe had become more than just a gathering place. Regular customers have favorite seats now, she observed. Always facing doors, watching windows. They don't even realize they're doing it. The Silver Falls Gazette reflected these changes in subtle ways. Marcus Rivera found himself adjusting. His reporting style, including details that would once have seemed trivial. Weather conditions, visitor movements, changes in town patterns, he explained. Information that seems ordinary, but serves deeper purposes. Even the town's religious life showed signs of adaptation. Father O'Malley noticed his congregation had developed new habits during services. They position themselves differently in church, he shared with Cross. Maintain clear sight lines, stay aware of exits. Survival instincts become part of spiritual practice. Victoria Santos discovered her photography business had evolved beyond simple portraiture. People request specific angles now, she explained, showing Cross recent works. Want views of street approaches, building layouts, creating visual records of the town's defensive positions without realizing it. The transformation extended to the town's social hierarchy. Eleanor Wright noticed how her students' parents had formed informal networks of observation and communication. They coordinate school pickups now, she explained to Sullivan. Take turns watching different approaches to the schoolyard. They think they're just being careful parents, but they're actually creating sophisticated surveillance patterns. The town's business community had developed new rhythms. James McPherson found his blacksmith shop had become a natural gathering point for sharing information. Ranchers bring news from outlying areas, he noted. Miners report unusual activities in the hills. Every horseshoe fitting becomes an intelligence briefing without anyone realizing it. Clara Martinez's seamstress shop revealed another dimension of change. Ladies' social circles have a new purpose, she explained while working on a dress. Gossip carries tactical value now. Who's new in town? Who's asking questions? Who's watching the bank? All filtered through afternoon tea conversations. The town's stagecoach operations showed similar evolution. Frank Morrison noticed how passenger interactions had transformed. Regular travelers report changes along routes, he shared. Weather patterns, trail conditions, stranger movements, everything gets passed along naturally. Judge Reynolds observed changes in how legal matters were handled. Court sessions have new significance, he explained to Cross. Public gatherings become opportunities for townspeople to share observations, coordinate responses, and maintain awareness of potential threats. The town's undertaker contributed unique insights into the social transformation. Funeral preparations have deeper meaning now, Jeremiah Black noted. People plan services with attention to timing, positioning, and crowd movement. Every ceremony becomes an exercise in crowd control. The Silver Crown Hotel's operations reflected the town's new awareness. Manager Richard Palmer found himself coordinating more than just rooms. Guest patterns matter more, he explained. Who stays where, which windows they prefer, how they move through town, everything gets noticed and shared. Samuel Chen's laundry business provided another window into the change. Regular customers bring more than clothes now, he shared. Bring information, observations, patterns they notice. Clean shirts become a reason for intelligence sharing. The town's Mexican quarter showed similar adaptation. Isabella Rodriguez's restaurant had become a natural observation post. Regular customers choose specific tables, she noted. Watch the street while eating, share news while dining. Every meal serves multiple purposes. Peter McCarthy's night watch rounds took on new significance. Town's rhythm changed, he explained during his evening report. People are more aware at night, more coordinated. Even in darkness, the community works together without realizing why. The transformation reached even the town's youngest members. Michael Chen and his friends had developed their own warning system. We use chalk marks now, he demonstrated proudly. Different symbols mean different things. Mr. Hawthorne says it's like a special language. Margaret Sullivan noticed changes in library patron behavior. They check different books now, she observed. Military history, urban planning, even architecture. Knowledge gathering becomes a community priority without conscious effort. Albert Morgan's gunsmith shop reflected the town's evolving mindset. Not just buying weapons anymore, he explained. Want to understand them, learn proper handling, maintenance. Community develops military discipline naturally. As evening approached, Marshal Cross assembled these observations in Sullivan's office, seeing how Hawthorne's influence had reshaped the town's social fabric. He hasn't just prepared defenses, Cross realized. He's created a community that functions like a military unit without realizing it. Every social interaction, every daily routine serves a tactical purpose. The town's assayer, Marcus Thompson, added financial perspective to the transformation. Business patterns show new awareness, he explained. People timing transactions differently, coordinating movements and sharing information through normal commerce. Thomas Richardson found his carpentry work had taken on strategic importance. Building repairs have new meaning, he demonstrated. Every modification serves multiple purposes. Community learning to think defensively through daily work. William Drake's telegraph operations revealed the extent of change. Messages carry more weight now, he noted. Simple greetings contain observations, warnings, coordination details, town communicating on multiple levels without conscious effort. As night fell, the full scope of Silver Falls' transformation became clear. Hawthorne hadn't just prepared the town physically. He had reshaped its very nature, turning a simple mining community into a coordinated defensive organism that operated on both conscious and unconscious levels. The legendary strategist who had orchestrated the Red Canyon massacre had achieved something far more sophisticated. He had created a living community that functioned as a unified defensive entity while maintaining the appearance of normal frontier life. Every social interaction, every daily routine, every casual conversation now served his grand design, though only he could see the full pattern of what he had created. The confrontation that would cement Marcus Hawthorne's legend began not with gunfire or violence, but with silence. An unnatural quiet fell over Silver Falls as dawn painted the mountain peaks gold. The Blackwood gang's carefully orchestrated plan started unfolding exactly as they had designed it, and precisely as Hawthorne had predicted. Edward Pierce led the first team into position, their movements displaying the military precision that had made them infamous. But with each step, they were walking deeper into Hawthorne's elaborate design. They're moving exactly where he wants them, Marshal Cross observed from his position near the telegraph office. Every route they take, every position they secure, it's all part of his choreography. The gang's advance teams moved through town with practiced efficiency, securing what they thought were key positions. Each man confident in their roles, each movement part of a plan they had spent months perfecting. Victoria Santos, from her photography studio's elevated position, captured the moment their confidence began to waver. First team realized something was wrong when they tried to secure the bank's rear entrance, she later reported, found themselves channeled into positions that left them exposed from multiple angles. Theodore Whitaker, watching from inside the bank, observed the precise moment Pierce understood their predicament. The look on his face, the banker recalled, when he realized every defensive position they'd identified had been subtly modified. Each one now served as a trap rather than cover. The transformation of Silver Falls from frontier town to tactical masterpiece revealed itself gradually to the increasingly desperate attackers. Every route they had scouted, every fallback position they had identified, every escape path they had planned, all had been anticipated and counted months or even years in advance. It was like watching a complex machine activate, Benjamin Drake described from his telegraph office vantage point. each piece of Hawthorne's design engaging perfectly as the gang triggered his preparations. The Blackwood gang's military precision became their undoing. Their careful coordination, instead of providing advantage, only ensured they moved exactly as Hawthorne had predicted. Each team found themselves isolated, their carefully planned support positions rendered useless by subtle changes to the town's architecture. They're trying to adapt, Marshal Cross noted to Sullivan, watching from their concealed position. But every alternative they choose leads them deeper into his trap. He's not just predicting their moves, he's controlling their options. The gang's attempt to secure the high ground revealed another layer of Hawthorne's genius. The church tower, which they had identified as a crucial sniper position, had been subtly modified. The stairs creaked at specific points, creating an early warning system. The bell rope, seemingly ordinary, was positioned to allow defenders to incapacitate anyone attempting to access the tower. Dr. Harrison, watching from her clinic, observed the psychological impact on the attackers. "You could see the moment each man realized they weren't in control," she reported. The confidence drained from their faces as they understood every move they made had been anticipated months ago. Li Wei's strategic position provided unique insights into the unfolding trap. "Like watching spiderweb in morning dew," he explained, "invisible until light hits the right angle. By then, too late for the prey to escape." The gang's attempts to implement their backup plans only revealed more layers of Hawthorne's preparation. Each fallback position they had identified turned out to be another carefully prepared trap. The stables, which they had planned to use for a rapid escape, became a choke point. The alleyways they had mapped as escape routes channeled them into killing zones. James McPherson, from his blacksmith shop, witnessed their growing desperation. Every tactical option they tried had been countered before they even thought of it, he recalled. It was like watching chess players realize they've been in checkmate for the last 10 moves. Clara Martinez, whose shop provided a clear view of the main street, described the moment the gang's military discipline began to crack. "They started making mistakes," she noted, "rushing decisions, breaking formation, exactly what Hawthorne had predicted they would do under pressure. The town's children, trained through months of games, played their own crucial role. Tommy Walsh and his friends used their practice signals to relay information about the gang's movements, their innocent plays conveying crucial tactical intelligence to the town's defenders." Victoria Santos captured the critical moment when Pierce realized the full scope of their predicament. Her photographs showed the exact instant when understanding dawned on his face. They weren't just trapped. They were performing a role in someone else's carefully crafted performance. Samuel Chen, observing from his laundry, noticed how the gang's coordinated teams became increasingly isolated. "Like watching silk threads snap one by one," he described. "Each break makes the whole pattern weaker." Hawthorne himself remained in his bookshop, seemingly absorbed in his ledger. But Marshal Cross recognized the careful attention behind his casual pose. "He's conducting an orchestra," Cross realized, every piece moving exactly as composed, every reaction predicted and countered. The gang's attempt to force the situation through direct action proved disastrous. Their coordinated assault on the bank triggered Hawthorne's final trap. Every position they had prepared, every angle they had calculated, had been subtly adjusted to create overlapping fields of fire. It was mathematical, Judge Reynolds later described. Each man's attempt to find cover only drove them into precisely prepared killing zones, like watching equations resolve themselves. William Drake's telegraph office provided the perfect vantage point to witness the gang's final realization. "They understood too late," he reported. "Every scout they'd sent, every preparation they'd made, had only served to perfect their own trap." The confrontation reached its climax, not with a dramatic shootout, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. The Blackwood gang, renowned for their military precision and tactical genius, found themselves systematically disarmed and captured, their own expertise turned against them. Surrender was inevitable, Marshal Cross explained in his official report. Hawthorne hadn't just outmaneuvered them, he had turned their entire operational methodology into a weapon against them. Every skill they possessed only served to ensure they would fall into his trap exactly as planned. Theodore Whitaker, watching from the bank vault he had once feared would be their target, observed the final moments. It wasn't just about protecting the money, he realized. Hawthorne had turned our whole town into a lesson about the difference between tactical knowledge and true strategic genius. As the dust settled, the full scope of Hawthorne's achievement became clear. He hadn't just thwarted a bank robbery, he had orchestrated a masterpiece of strategic warfare that would be studied for generations. The legend of the Red Canyon Massacre paled in comparison to this bloodless victory, where an entire gang of military-trained outlaws had been defeated, not by force, but by finding themselves unwitting performers in a master strategist's grandest design. The true art of warfare, Hawthorne finally spoke, closing his ledger as the last prisoner was secured, isn't about who has the most men or the best weapons. It's about making your opponent's strength into their greatest weakness. The Blackwoods, military precision, their careful planning, their tactical expertise, these weren't advantages. They were strings I could pull to make them dance exactly as I intended. The quiet bookkeeper who had spent 2 years preparing his masterpiece had demonstrated why he was considered the frontier's greatest strategic mind. The legend of Marcus Chessmaster Hawthorne would now tell not just of the lawman who could turn a box canyon into a killing field, but of the genius who could transform an entire town into an elaborate trap, using his enemy's own expertise to ensure their defeat. As the sun set over Silver Falls, Marshal Cross made one final note in his report. Some men are remembered for their speed with a gun, others for their courage in battle. But Hawthorne will be remembered for something far rarer, the ability to see not just moves but patterns, to understand not just tactics, but human nature itself. He proved that the most dangerous weapon on the frontier isn't a gun or a badge, but a mind that can turn an entire community into a symphony of strategic warfare, where every note plays exactly as composed, and victory is achieved not through violence, but through the perfect understanding of how men think, move, and act. Under pressure, the legend of the lawman who never fired a shot in his greatest victory would live on, reminding future generations that true mastery isn't about overwhelming force or superior numbers, but about understanding the intricate dance of human behavior and turning it into an instrument of justice. In the days that followed, the full impact of Hawthorne's achievement rippled through the territory. Law enforcement officials from 3 states arrived to study his methods, marveling at how he had turned an entire town into a tactical masterpiece. Every detail served multiple purposes, noted Captain James Wilson of the Territorial Marshals. The way he positioned mirrors to create surveillance networks, how he used the town's daily routines to mask defensive preparations. It's revolutionary thinking for frontier law enforcement. The captured members of the Blackwood gang, held in Sheriff Sullivan's expanded jail, provided unprecedented insights into how completely Hawthorne had outmaneuvered them. "We thought we were reading the town," Edward Pierce explained during his interrogation, analyzing weaknesses, identifying advantages, never realized every bit of intelligence we gathered was exactly what he wanted us to see. Man turned our own expertise into a trap. Victoria Santos's photographs of the operation became teaching tools for law enforcement agencies across the frontier. Each image shows another layer of his strategy, she explained to visiting officials. how he used light and shadow, positioned resources, created interlocking fields of control throughout town. Dr. Harrison's medical records revealed another dimension of Hawthorne's planning. He didn't just prepare for combat, she noted, reviewing her documents. He prepared for every possible outcome, ensuring even if violence erupted, casualties would be minimized through careful positioning and preparation. The town's Chinese community gained new respect as their role in the victory became clear. "Mr. Hawthorne understands ancient wisdom," Li Wei explained to Marshal Cross. "Know that the best victory is one where the enemy defeats self through own actions." Benjamin Drake found himself documenting an unprecedented level of interest in Hawthorne's methods. Telegraph requests coming in from law enforcement agencies nationwide, he reported. Everyone wants to understand how one man turned an entire community into a defensive masterpiece. Judge Reynolds, presiding over the preliminary hearings, observed the lasting impact on frontier justice. "What Hawthorne achieved here goes beyond tactical success," he noted in his judicial summary. "He's demonstrated a new approach to law enforcement, where strategic thinking trumps brute force." The town's children, who had played such a crucial role through their games and observations, gained a new appreciation for their training. "Mr. Hawthorne didn't just teach us games," Tommy Walsh explained to younger kids. "He taught us how to be part of something bigger, how to work together without even knowing it." Theodore Whitaker found his bank becoming a case study in defensive architecture. "Engineers from back east are studying how he modified our building," he shared with pride. "Simple changes that transformed a vulnerable target into a central point of tactical control." James McPherson's analysis of the operation revealed military implications. "Man's redefined frontier defense," the veteran observed, "showed how to turn civilian infrastructure into sophisticated defensive networks without compromising daily function." Even the captured Blackwood gang members expressed reluctant admiration. "Never seen anything like it," one lieutenant admitted during questioning. "We're trained military men, fought in major battles. But this was like trying to fight a ghost who knew our every move before we made it." Clara Martinez noticed how the town's social fabric had been permanently altered. "People move differently now," she observed, "more aware, more coordinated. What Mr. Hawthorne taught us, it's become part of who we are." The legend of Marcus Chessmaster Hawthorne evolved beyond the tale of the Red Canyon Massacre. His bloodless victory in Silver Falls became a textbook example of strategic genius, studied by military tacticians and law enforcement officials alike. "What he achieved here transcends traditional combat doctrine," Marshal Cross explained in his final report. "He didn't just defeat an enemy. He created a new form of strategic warfare where an entire community becomes both a fortress and weapon, all while maintaining the appearance of normal civilian life." As Silver Falls settled back into its rhythms, the subtle changes Hawthorne had implemented remained. The town had been transformed not just physically, but fundamentally. Every citizen had become part of a living defensive organism, though few fully understood the sophistication of the system they now inhabited. "The true genius isn't in what he built," Sullivan reflected, watching his town adapt to its new reality. "It's in how he made it self-sustaining. The patterns, the awareness, the coordination, it's all become natural part of the town's character." Hawthorne himself remained in his bookshop, apparently returning to his quiet life among his beloved volumes. But those who knew where to look could see how he continued to maintain and refine his creation, ensuring Silver Falls remained a model of sophisticated frontier defense. His legacy would inspire a new generation of lawmen and strategists, teaching that the greatest victories aren't won through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the patient cultivation of circumstances where victory becomes inevitable. The quiet bookkeeper who had orchestrated the most sophisticated defensive operation in frontier history had proven that true strategic genius lies not in the ability to overpower opponents, but in the art of turning their own strengths into the instruments of their defeat. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.